We're going to do a longevity tier list, intermittent fasting.
So here's the thing with intermittent fasting. There is a whole movement out there that tries to make the case that time-restricted eating and or intermittent fasting has health benefits. That's not the case unless you also calorically restrict.
Exercise, but specifically cardio.
This is my belief, right? That maintaining muscle mass as you age is critically important. Also, obviously, maintaining cardiovascular fitness. I mean, if I had to rank them, I would actually put cardio a little bit below resistance training.
Genetic testing?
I think it's important. I think I'd put it in
All right, Matt. So we've got a fun episode for you today. So we're going to do a longevity tier list. So on the internet, tier lists are pretty popular. I watch like watch ones or car
Don't
tier
believe
lists.
anything you hear on the internet.
True. Yeah. So including this. So this longevity tier list, I've got 26 different things to throw at you.
Okay.
We'll spend maybe a few minutes on each one. We'll rank them from A being the highest to F being the lowest. And I'll break down what each one of those means. I kind of want to give a disclaimer that this is just your professional opinion.
As always.
Yep, just kind of fun. And that for each item, we'll kind of be asking how important is this for achieving, optimal health span for most people.
Okay,
Sounds good. All right, so let me break down what each letter means. So you used to be professor, so I'm sure you're familiar with the A, B, C, D. So A, an essential part of pretty much everyone interested in improving their health span and lifespan.
Okay.
B, important part of most people's health span routine. C, may need more research. Only put effort in this category if A and B are already taken care of. D, not worth most people's time or money, but not harmful. F is not helpful, potentially harmful, not worth your time or money. And TBD is just to be determined. It's kind of like one where we can put things that you're just not quite ready to rank. So
Okay, I think I've got it.
all right, so starting with regular dental visits. So I got this guy here just to show you how it works. And I can take it and then drag it anywhere.
All right.
I'll put a C.
So first of all, I don't like rules, so I'm going to break the rules.
Okay.
But I would put this along with oral care as essential. So I guess that's an A.
All right, so regular dental visits. So, and how would you describe that? Maybe like twice every 6 months?
I would put that as just oral care, right? Taking care of your teeth is essential.
Okay, so this other one here would be actually like flossing and brushing.
Yeah, right. Do you
daily
absolutely
routine.
have to go to the dentist? Maybe a few people don't, but that's going to be part of, I would say, complete oral care approach.
Great, sounds good.
Okay.
So dental visits, maybe once, twice a year, regular dental and flossing, or brushing and flossing.
And I'm a big believer in flossing. I just have to say from my own personal experience that's had a huge difference. So
Are you good at it? You have a good habit of doing it?
yeah, I do it every time I brush my teeth, right? Again, this is just getting into the habit. It's funny because when I go to the dentist and they ask, do you floss? I'm like, yeah, every time I brush my teeth. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah, it's just a habit. So it's a good habit to get into.
So morning and night, twice a day, pretty much.
Most days, yes.
So are they asking you that because it looks like you don't floss from their end?
No, because they're surprised. It seems like most of their patients, if they floss, they do it once a day as if it's like this big chore, and it's not. Just get in the habit.
For sure, like most things. All right, next up, we got DEXA scans. I'll put it here.
DEXA scans, so what's the difference between B and C again? B is...
So let's go. So B is important part of most people's health span routine. C is may need more research, only put effort here if A and B are already taken care of.
So I'm going to put that in like a B- category for right now.
Okay.
I think it is an important part for most people. Probably not the most important, but it's certainly something I think that most people should do.
Okay, and that might change as it becomes more affordable and more...
Well, I think
available.
it's more available. Affordability, I mean, again, if you're in a city that has a body spec or a comparable provider, it's like $49, I think, $39 if you can get it, when they're having a special. So sure, maybe that's not affordable to everybody, but most people can afford $39 for their health.
So in this example, if you have someone who's regular dental visits and flossing, and they want to allocate more time and energy into their longevity, then DEXA would be a good
I
thing.
would say, right, in terms of like a relative importance, oral care is going to be above this assessment of body composition, in my view, yes.
Great. So next one, similar to DEXA, we have bioimpedance scales. So the example here is in-body, but it could be other ones as well.
Yeah, and what's the, sorry, I'm going to have to keep asking
No
this.
worries.
What's the D definition again?
D is not worth most people's time or money, but not harmful.
Yeah, I'd probably put this in that category. I suppose knowing your body weight fluctuation, on a semi-regular basis is useful. Certainly is useful. Do you need an impedance scale to do that? Probably not.
So really just a scale would do the job for most
Yeah.
people. All right, up next is fitness wearables. So I mean, it can include Aura, it can include Apple, Fitbit.
Yeah, I think that's probably a C. I don't know that most people need it, but it's a super valuable tool. Again, I can't remember the exact definition for C. This is my own age-related cognitive decline, but
Yeah, may need more research. Only put effort here if A and B are taken
yeah,
care
I think
of.
that's fair. I think it's a valuable tool to a lot of people. Is it essential? No. So let's leave it there for now, and we maybe revisit it at the end.
All right, so next one's a pretty broad category. It's just blood work in general.
Yeah, I'd put that in the A category. Like, I think you really need to know where your key biomarkers are. And it's something I wish that I had paid attention to earlier.
Yep, great. So next we have multi-cancer early detection testing.
Yeah, so this one, I guess I'd put it in like a B plus category or a B category. I think it's quite valuable and important. Is it essential? I guess it depends on whether you have cancer or not, but and whether the test is going to detect it. But I'd probably put it in that second tier down.
Okay, so these are pretty pricey, right? From what I know, like $1,000 a kit.
Yeah.
And this is kind of thing where like how.
So I didn't know economics were part of the rating scale.
Oh no,
here.
this is me just asking.
Yeah.
So how often would you recommend someone could afford doing this somewhat regularly?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's worth saying there are multiple types of cancer detection, right? Cancer screening. So the picture is of the Grail Gallery test, which is what's called a liquid biopsy blood test for several different types of cancer. There is the more standard sort of breast cancer screening. There are whole body MRI. I think we can, for today, maybe lump those all together in cancer screening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Okay. So next one we have is epigenetic age testing. So the example is my DNA age, but there's a bunch of companies, I believe.
Yeah. What's the F category?
F is, let me go back real quick. I want to make sure.
F is like no evidence, maybe harmful. I guess I'd have to put this in the D category.
So not helpful, potentially harmful, not worth your time or money.
Well, based on the not worth your time, I don't know. I mean, again, I would say this is D minus F plus range. Like, I think these are useful research tools.
Yes.
I guess I'd put it in the D category.
Okay.
I think there's some value if it's done in the right way. I think the direct to consumer tests, I don't see much value there for most people.
Yeah. And not to influence too much, but this could be an example of something that's to be determined, which is need more research. Maybe as the science gets better, these tests might become more beneficial.
Sure. I think that's probably true.
We can leave it in D. That's fine. All right. Next one is NMN.
I don't know, D or F, somewhere down there.
Well, F's lonely down here. I don't know. We'd have our first F, or we could make it a D.
All right, let's put it in D for now.
All right. No F so
again,
far.
I'm not saying there's no value to these things. I think the value is unproven. And I think with the NMN, there's the potential for harm. Maybe. So
yeah, depending.
And
if someone wanted to do NMN, I think you'd probably recommend plenty of testing before and after, like blood work and.
Yeah, so the thing with NMN is the concerns around kidney damage. And again, there's not a ton of data to support that. There's one study that has been presented at conferences from mice showing that mice getting NMN, aged mice getting NMN can develop kidney pathology. So, is that a one-off study? Is it the strain background? Is it only in mice? I don't know. I just know a lot of the science around the NAD precursors in general is pretty bad and hasn't been reproducible. And so I think that's clouding my skepticism. That's not exactly the right way to say it, but it's influencing my skepticism for the whole topic in general. Maybe I'm being overly negative on the NAD precursors, but I know too much of the questionable science, and so I'm not seeing anything that really convinces me that there's a lot of value for most people.
Well, why do you think it's so popular right now on social media and just being talked about a lot?
I mean, I think it's been marketed well, and I think there are some very charismatic people who have talked about it, and I think there are a lot of uninformed influencers who have parroted what they hear.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I think we have an F coming up soon. So next one is resveratrol.
Actually, I'd probably put resveratrol. I mean, it's not so different from NMN. I think the science is a little bit even less convincing around resveratrol. Doesn't mean there's no benefit for certain people. I think it's clear resveratrol is not a longevity treatment. And so for longevity, yeah, I guess I'd put it in the F category.
Would there be a use case outside of longevity for someone?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some literature that resveratrol, at least in certain disease models in animals, can have some benefits. So, things like diet-induced obesity, there was a study in mice, some evidence in certain types of cardiovascular disease or metabolic disorder. The human data, again, is very mixed, and there are some reasons to believe that there are some negative side effects associated with resveratrol. So, again, at this point, I haven't seen anything that convinces me that certainly nothing to suggest it's going to move the needle for most people. It's most likely you're just going to pee it out, so probably not going to be harmful, but I think there is some evidence for negative effects as well. So I don't take it, and I wouldn't recommend it.
All right, so we have a full episode of that coming out soon, right? Resveratrol?
Yeah, we'll have a deep dive on at least the early data on resveratrol and from a longevity perspective in particular. Yeah.
Right. Cool. So up next is rapamycin.
Yeah, rapamycin. I think I would probably put that. So the C category is only if you've got the other two dialed in. I think I'd probably put that in the C plus category.
Okay, so people really want to go to the next level, or
well, and again, it's not going to be for everybody, right? I think this is part of what we are learning is who might benefit from rapamycin. Again, for people who've watched the podcast and the R files will probably recognize I am at least pretty convinced that the risk can be minimized and there's the potential for pretty significant upside for some people. So yeah, I'd probably put it in the C category.
Do you have a minimum age you'd even recommend it to someone?
Well, again, I don't know that I would recommend it in general. I think it's a very individual question at this point. I don't see a lot of reason outside of, people who may have very specific disorders for use of rapamycin in the context of potential healthspan benefits, before the age of 40 at this point.
So 40. All right.
I just picked that out of thin air. But
yeah. It's kind of George, the CMO here. He sort of made a comment of like he wouldn't prescribe it to me. I wasn't asking for it, but just kind of curious.
Somebody your age,
Maybe curious where does that shift? It seems popular age is around 50 plus though, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think for off-label use, that's probably about the time when the physicians who are comfortable prescribing it start to become comfortable for their patients.
All right. So next up is D3.
Yeah. So I would say here, measuring and getting your D3 into, what we would consider the optimal range is an A, right? It's like any other essential or important nutrient, right? You want to optimize that as best you can.
Yeah. So here's something where like I've actually never tested my D3. I'm going to do it with Optispan soon. But I've taken 5,000 IU for probably 5 years.
That's very common, and I get it. I get why. Again, I've commented on this before. I think, I understand the rationale there. It makes much more sense to measure because you can measure, and it's not that expensive to measure. And then if you need to supplement into the optimal range. For two reasons. One, you might already be optimal. Not very many people in this part of the country are, but you might be. And so you could supplement yourself out of the optimal range. And two, there's no way to know if you are deficient, whether 5,000 a day or 5,000 every other day or whatever you're doing is enough to get you into the optimal range unless you measure it. Yeah. So it makes much more sense to me to measure, then intervene, then measure again and make sure you actually got where you wanted to be.
Okay.
That's not specific to vitamin D. That's true for a whole bunch of biomarkers, but that's a very obvious one.
Yeah, and they do it with like statins, for example, but they don't really do it. So D3 is also because it's fat soluble, you could potentially have too much, I'm assuming, unlike vitamin C, which you'll just pee out.
That's right. And it takes a while to show up in the blood test, right? So I don't know what the lag time is, but it's certainly on the order of weeks to a couple of months of supplementing before you'll see sort of where you where you equilibrate out. So, if you've been taking 5,000 a day for several months, then you're probably at sort of a steady state, whatever you measure. But if you just started, it won't show up on a blood test for a while.
Okay, it's a little bit delayed. All right, next up we have is genetic testing. So the example is 23andMe, but it could be other ones. I kind of put ApoE in here as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think I'd put it in the A category. I think it's something that everybody should do, and there's a lot of valuable information there.
What I like about it is it's relatively inexpensive compared to like Grail, for example, and it's a one-time test.
I think the tests are inexpensive. Getting a quality interpretation is harder. Like 23andMe has really had to walk the line for what they tell people, right? They have been very careful not to give people a lot of useful information because they're worried about, legal complications that come from potentially practicing medicine, right? So yes, it is cheap to get done. It's not always easy to interpret the information that you get for the average person.
I saw you used to be able to download your raw data, and they recently turned that off because of their leak.
Yeah, I don't know any of the details, or I've heard that it's been harder for people to get their own data. I can't imagine that they are allowed to not give you your data because that is your data, right? I think they're required to. I think it is probably a temporary thing. Yeah. And there are other companies out there that you can get your genotyping done through. So 23andMe is just the one that most people will have heard of. Ancestry has a genetic genotyping as well, and you can get your data from Ancestry.
Okay, nice. I haven't done that one. All right, so next up, we have the first of our sort of 4 pillars, which is sleep.
Yeah, if it's a pillar, it goes in the A category. Yeah. No question about it.
I was sort of thinking a couple days ago of an analogy of eat, sleep, move, connect, each one being a leg on a bar stool. And if you pull out any, the bar stool falls over.
Yeah, I mean, they're connected for sure, right, with each other. So if you impact one, you're probably going to impact all of them.
Yeah, because here we'll talk a lot about them. We kind of like try to rank them. It's like you can't. Each one's equally important.
Yeah.
Actually, next one is intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding. That whole bucket.
Yeah, what's the difference between C and D again?
C is may need more research, only put effort here if A and B are already taken care of, and D is not worth most people's time or money, but it's not harmful.
I mean, I don't even know that I would say that. So here's the thing with intermittent fasting, right? Like I think it's a useful strategy for some people to maintain a healthy body weight, right? I also think for some people, and again, we should probably define intermittent fasting because it means different things to different people. But so intermittent fasting, I would define as fasting for at least 24 hours. Shrinking the window you eat into 8 or 12 or whatever I would call time-restricted eating, right? So both of those, though, I think about very similarly in that they are both useful strategies for some people to maintain a healthy body weight. There is a whole movement out there that tries to make the case that time-restricted eating and or intermittent fasting has health benefits beyond that. And the literature, in my view, at least in the animal studies, is pretty clear. That's not the case unless you also calorically restrict. So the benefits of intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding have not been separated from the benefits of caloric restriction. And I have seen nothing to make me believe that there are benefits from either of those strategies beyond caloric restriction. Okay, so I just think that's important to appreciate. But I do believe there are some people where these are useful tools to help them maintain a healthy body weight. Is it essential? No. Is it beneficial for most people? I don't know. But are there any benefits beyond just a tool to maintain healthy body weight? I haven't seen any data. So yeah, I think more research needs to be done to establish whether or not there are benefits outside of that. Having said that, personally, I think there are better places to spend our research funds, and way too much money is being spent to study intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating, in my view. Is it a D or an F? I don't know. Could it be harmful? I think that's the question. Yes, I do believe that intermittent fasting can be harmful. I do believe that some people take it too far. It can cause psychological problems in some people. It can cause loss of lean mass in some people if they're not taking steps to maintain lean mass. That's true for weight loss as well. So anyways, I don't know. I've gone on a little bit of a rant. Just because I get frustrated with how much bad information there is out there around intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating.
Okay, well, I'm going to put it D, just because there's probably some people maybe who
Okay,
benefit.
Resveratrol is awful lonely down there.
Yeah,
but
all right.
leave it in D. We'll see what else.
I don't know if I ever
comes
told
along.
you, but before we connected, I read a popular longevity book, and I walked away thinking like I have to time restrict, my feeding. So I went down to 1 hour eating window. So 23-hour fasting, 1 meal a day. And
That's
I did that.
almost what I would call intermittent fasting. Yeah, 1 meal a day is a variant of time restricted eating. Yeah.
Yep, and I got down to, so I usually walk around 205. I got down to like 185, and people were concerned.
Yeah.
Like I looked not great in terms of, because I lost mostly muscle.
Yeah, one of these days maybe I'll tell a story about a former grad student of mine who tried 1 meal a day, and it definitely has psychological effects in some people. But yeah, it can be absolutely. It's very hard not to lose weight if you have been eating certainly if you've been eating a typical American diet, the standard American diet, SAD, SAD. It's very hard not to lose weight if you go to eating 1 meal a day. Can you cram in 3,000 calories in 1 meal? Sure, you could, but most people aren't going to do that, at least not every day. So then the question is, are you eating a healthy diet? And what is the impact on your body composition while that's happening? And what are the psychological impacts? And I think it's complicated, but it's going to be very individual. But in general, that is a caloric restriction paradigm, right? And so there are the effects that go along with caloric restriction. If you're losing weight, almost by definition, you are calorically deprived. You're in caloric imbalance, at least, right? And so that's a caloric restriction effect. And you may be able to achieve the same caloric restriction effect on weight in a more healthy way by using a different strategy to achieve caloric imbalance.
Like dietary restriction or counting your calories.
Dietary restriction is sort of a catch-all for all of these things, right? So yes, right. So tracking calories, maybe, still eating whatever it is, 3 meals a day, but your total calories are still less than calories expended, increasing exercise. There are all sorts of different strategies to achieve caloric imbalance that will cause you to lose weight. This is, I think, the thing that makes the time-restricted eating so compelling, or intermittent fasting, is it's easy conceptually for people to stick to. Yeah, I'm just going to eat 1 meal a day. I can eat whatever I want. I'm just going to eat 1 meal a day. I don't think that's a particularly healthy mindset, but that's an easy mindset for a lot of people to adopt.
I think for me, it turned eating into just like a light switch instead of a dimmer switch. So it's sort of easy, just like either I'm eating or I'm not.
Yeah.
And you end up with a small enough window, you end up being restricted. But
again, we've gone on for a while, but I just think it's really important for people to understand there is really no good evidence that there are benefits associated with either time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting beyond caloric restriction. There are clear benefits in certain contexts from caloric restriction. In longevity, lots and lots of animal studies showing you can increase lifespan, improve healthspan metrics. In people who are overweight or obese, lots of benefits that accrue when you get to a healthy weight. And the only way to do that is by being in caloric imbalance. And caloric restriction is the easiest way to achieve that. I think the question is, are there any benefits to these strategies if you're not calorically restricted? And there is this perception that has been sort of, amplified by uninformed influencers that that's been shown, and it just hasn't. And that, I think, is where the disconnect comes in.
Like autophagy comes to mind is what people think.
So autophagy is a biological process that gets induced by inhibition of mTOR. And if you fast long enough, you will induce autophagy. I think and there's some reason to believe that's beneficial in certain contexts. The question, though, is if you intermittent fast long enough to induce autophagy, let's say you fast for 48 hours, but you don't caloric restrict, so you eat twice as much the next day, or is the detriment from doing that going to offset any benefits you might have gotten from autophagy? So is it the autophagy? Is it the caloric restriction? Is it the overall context that matters, right? And that's where I think there's this disconnect that, the idea that just increasing autophagy in and of itself, if everything else is equal, is going to give you some health benefit, that really hasn't been shown.
Okay. Well, just to end on a good note, just me spending too much time and sort of like watching the YouTube videos of this, sort of this world. Since the drop of Outlive by Peter Attia, I've noticed a shift away from IF a little bit. Yeah.
And Peter's interesting because he was big in fasting at one point, and now I think has moved at least a little bit away from it as a cure-all, right? Again, I think for certain people, it can be a very powerful strategy. If somebody wants to, if they're overweight, they want to get to a healthy weight, and they want to try it, great, try it. I would just say pay attention to your diet quality, one. So don't go in with the idea that I can eat 1 meal a day or I can skip eating, 2 days a week. and then I can eat whatever I want. That's just dumb. So focus on diet quality. And then I would also say, think about resistance training, or at least monitor your lean mass to make sure you aren't disproportionately losing lean mass while you're losing weight.
Great. All right. Next one is exercise, but specifically cardio.
So this is a little bit tricky, right? So, and I think the one after this is going to be resistance training, right? So, I mean, again, if I had to, and they're both important, obviously, I guess I would say resistance training needs to go in the A category. This is my belief, right? That maintaining muscle mass as you age is critically important. Also, obviously, maintaining cardiovascular fitness is critically important. They probably should both be in the A category, I guess. But I mean, if I had to rank them, I would actually put cardio a little bit below resistance training, in part because if you do resistance training, intensely enough, you will get a cardio benefit from it as well. But because I think that that's the place where most people fall down. We'll just put them both in the A category. Okay. This will avoid the cardio people getting all upset with me, I guess. But exercise obviously is an A. I think they're both important. I think resistance training or maintaining muscle mass does not get the attention that it deserves in the wellness community. And I should say that you don't have to lift weights to maintain muscle mass. There are other ways that you can maintain muscle mass with age. I just think that resistance training is the one that is easiest for most people to accomplish.
Yeah. Like I know you personally love pull-ups, so that would be an example.
I have learned to love pull-ups. Yeah, I didn't definitely was not a pull-up guy for most of my life.
Well, I'm going to brag for you. So last week we did a VO2 max test, and right when he took the mask off, you went and did 20 pull-ups just to see if you could.
This is true. I did.
I guessed 10, and you were like, I'm going to double that. So the next one, I'm going to give a little.
So we're going to now get a bunch of people. We're going to get a bunch of the pull-up, purists. Like, were they really pull-ups? Did you go all the way up? Did you go all the way down? Okay, well, maybe we'll do a video and we can put it out there. I did do 20 pull-ups. They probably weren't perfect, but you know what? They were good enough.
Yeah, and then actually a comment you made was maybe I didn't go hard enough on the VO2.
Yeah, that's true.
So the next one I'm going to give a little preamble is, I feel like in the healthspan sort of coaching, it's popular now to separate zone 2 cardio, zone 5 cardio, resistance training, like to work out via like energy systems or to break them up by energy systems. Yeah. So this one is cross training. So you think CrossFit, Orange Theory, combining a workout with cardio and strength at the same time.
Yeah, I'd probably put that in the C category. Like if it works for you, great. Is it something everybody needs to do? No, I don't think so.
Okay, great.
I think you just got to figure out what works for you. But, and again, this is an area where maybe I'll change my mind, as I learn more, as the research accumulates, but I haven't seen anything that convinces me that CrossFit per se is necessary to get the optimal benefits from exercise.
Okay. Yeah. I can see a certain person who maybe is so busy they can't.
Yeah. Like I said, if it works for you, sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Right.
But in general, it's better probably to separate those two.
I don't know if it's better. But I'm just saying I don't see anything that makes me think that per se is essential. Essentially, you're getting both the cardio and the resistance.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Next one, creatine monohydrate. This is actually the same brand I use.
Yeah, me too, by the way. I would put that in the B, probably. B. Yeah, I think I become a believer. Like, well, actually, what's the difference between B and C again? God, I'm doing terrible here.
So B
I'm too worried about the actual definition you gave.
No, it's important.
If we're ranking these things, I'm going to put it in B.
So B is an important part of most people's health span routine. C is may need more research. And only do this if A and B are taken care of.
Yeah, I guess I'd give it like a B minus. Put it in
the B minus, that means it drops. So keep it in B. Okay,
put it in B.
Right. Yeah, so I used to work at GNC for a number of years, and my takeaway with creatine is just read the label. The only ingredient should be creatine monohydrate.
Yeah.
5 grams for most people. If you weigh a lot, maybe a little slightly more.
Yeah.
But don't do not micronized is fine, but don't do all the weird ones. All right, up next we got kind of a pair. We'll do them together. So start with not smoking.
That's in the A category. Like there's no good reason to smoke.
No smoking.
I get it. I used to smoke. I get it.
I was just about to ask. You did at one
point? Started when I was in probably 7th grade.
What?
And how old was I when I quit? Probably mid-20s. Yeah, probably. It was not too long after I met my wife, so I was probably like 24.
Did she have something to do with you stop smoking?
We decided to together. She smoked at the time too. Yeah.
Oh, that's super interesting. That's new lore.
And I feel very fortunate. Like I was not physically addicted, right? It was more just a psychological thing or habit, right?
Yeah.
So I know for some people it's a physical addiction and really, really hard to quit it. I didn't find it difficult.
I have a feeling that your lungs are probably that now of a non-smoker because it's been so long. You kind of smoked in that small window.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely right. Certainly the data suggests that people can, mostly come back from smoking. Although the epidemiology does suggest there are some long-term risks. That's why sometimes you'll see like lifetime packs smoked or year packs smoked or whatever they use to estimate some of these risks. So I think it's an open question. Can you ever come fully back from the damage that you did from smoking? Probably most of the way, and I think some people probably can fully come back, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely less popular in my generation that I've noticed.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think this is one place where, America has done a pretty good job. We've done a really crappy job in a lot of areas of health. But yeah, I think smoking in particular is an area where the policies that were put in place have had a significant impact. And you go to other parts of the world and you still see a lot more smoking than you do here.
Okay. All right. So next one is not drinking. I know you recently.
Yeah. So this is hard, right? So I guess I wouldn't quite go to the extent of completely cutting alcohol out. But I think if we frame it as, moderate consumption of alcohol, and by that, a pretty strict definition of moderate consumption of alcohol. So I think, if you look in the epidemiology, 1 drink a day, there are potentially some benefits associated with 1 drink of alcohol a day from an epidemiological perspective. But that's not, the big old American-sized wine glasses, right? We're talking like a real single alcoholic drink volume-wise. So I'm not, even though I pretty much have completely cut alcohol out, not completely, pretty much though, I maybe drink twice a month now, right? I used to drink every day.
As in like 2 drinks a month? So you mean like twice a month?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on the situation, but 2 or 3, right? I don't drink a lot when I drink, but I might have a beer at dinner if I'm out with friends or something like that. So I would say, I would actually say probably less than 1 drink a day is optimal. But if we kind of put some bounds on this idea of, not drinking every day, probably, but moderate consumption of alcohol, or moderate to none, I'd put in the A category. I'm not somebody who's going to say you should never drink. It's evil that, for health. But
that's fair.
Yeah. But certainly overconsumption of alcohol is just as damaging, if not more damaging, than smoking.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard people mention like 2 drinks a week kind of being the max for what moderate is described as.
That seems pretty reasonable to me. Again, everybody's going to be a little bit different, individual. But and I think this is actually an area where it's still a little bit unclear in terms of like optimal health span across the population, is complete abstinence from alcohol better than moderate consumption of alcohol? I think it's an open question. If you look in the epidemiology, you can certainly make a case that moderate consumption of alcohol has some benefits in terms of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease. So I think it's still an open case. That's partly why I'm not somebody who says you should completely abstain. I also think there's a social component for lots of people, and we know socialization and human connection is important as well.
Which is probably where the benefits come from, potentially.
Potentially, that's part of the story. Yeah, absolutely.
The connect pillar, sort of being with other people.
Yeah.
All right, up next we got CGMs, continuous glucose monitors.
Yeah, so I think I would probably put this in the B or C category. Like, it is something where I put it in the B category. Like, I think it's something that's useful for most people, at least as a one-off, to learn about their own interaction with food and their own metabolic state.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're going to be diving deep into that, I think, this month or next month.
Yeah.
All right, so here we have microbiome analysis. So this is some random company I'm not sure of, but they do gut analysis.
Yeah. I'd put it in the D category. I mean, I have a hard time saying that the microbiome analysis is any better than the biological age test at this point.
I see.
I think a lot of the stuff where they do a microbiome analysis and then tell you to take some supplements is not very well scientifically supported. Honestly, I think, the microbiome stuff can be useful in the context of just sort of figuring out from a global perspective, what is the composition of your microbiome, and should you, take sort of global steps like increasing the amount of insoluble fiber in your diet, things like that. Again, for most people, you probably don't need a microbiome test to tell you that you should probably increase the amount of fiber in your diet by eating healthy, fiber-rich vegetables, for example. I don't know. Again, this is an area that I think is a moving target. I feel like the science is farther ahead on the microbiome than on the biological aging clocks, but I'm not sure how much further ahead it is. And again, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of people upset with me for saying that, but that's kind of where I'm at with the microbiome. I don't really buy into a lot of this, and the microbiome supplements, again, I don't know. Maybe it's a C. Maybe, I don't know. Does the test really help you there? I don't know.
The supplements would be like prebiotics and probiotics, stuff like that. Okay. And also just this tier list is in that.
Yeah, well, prebiotics, again, prebiotics you can just get through the diet, right? In the form of a high fiber diet, or adding things like, fiber supplements to your protein shake. We talked about this previously, right? Like inulin powder, chia seeds. Apparently I pronounced that funny, chia seeds, whatever. Those kinds of things, right? You can just add, and those act as prebiotics. The probiotics, right? Taking a microbiome supplement. Again, I think there's a lot of questions around even that marketplace. Like, how many of them actually have viable CFUs, right? So the quality, it comes into play also with the efficacy, because a lot of the stuff that's on the market may not have any efficacy because there's very little to no regulation in the manufacturing of these products.
And if they have to be stored a certain way, you're not sure how Amazon or whoever, how they stored it.
Right.
So.
And also, I think, this is something most people don't realize. Again, I'm not really worried about this in the probiotic marketplace for most products, but, if you actually had a probiotic that worked well and changed the composition of your microbiome, that could have long-lasting effects that are unanticipated, right? And it's not so different than taking antibiotics. You take antibiotics, you wipe out your microbiome. We know that can have very long-lasting effects on people's metabolic state because you have changed the microbiome. And the same thing's true if you were to take a probiotic that actually had efficacy, dramatically remodeled your microbiome. We might think it's good given our current understanding of the microbiome, which is very rudimentary. We may not know what the long-term consequences of that are.
Yeah, so I took antibiotics for the first time 2 weeks ago when I had appendicitis.
Right.
And so the first time I ever had to think about this. So since then, I kind of upped my I guess it would be probiotics from diet and then fiber. So prebiotics from diet and fiber. So my wife said I probably wasn't on it long enough for it to impact, but I'm not sure how it works.
No, it would impact, absolutely. If you took, well, again, I don't know what they gave you, but most of the time, if you're on a course of antibiotics, it's enough to have an impact on your microbiome, and oftentimes it will dramatically change your gut microbiome. I guess that's another thing. We're using the term microbiome pretty sloppily, so we have been referring to the gut microbiome the whole time. There is, of course, the microbiome on your skin, the microbiome in your mouth. So there are multiple microbial communities in our body. Most of the time when people say microbiome, they mean the gut microbiome.
Okay. So similar to the DNA methylation test is sort of like to be determined. Maybe the science will get better.
I totally believe that the microbiome is hugely important for health. I'm not at all suggesting that's not the case. And that our ability to measure the microbiome and intervene through the microbiome will improve. I'm just not sure it's ready for prime time yet.
All right. So moving on, we got hormone replacement therapy, HRT, very popular right now.
Yeah. So again, I think we should probably, maybe we don't need to worry about male versus female. You can do hormone replacement therapy for women for menopause, right, is probably the most common form of hormone replacement therapy. Of course, there's also hormone replacement therapy in men for things like testosterone. So again, it's going to be individual. I think that knowing your hormonal status and hormone replacement therapy, if it is appropriate given your situation, is in the A bucket.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I think it's absolutely essential to understand your hormonal status, and it has a huge impact on quality of life for many, many people.
Mm-hmm. And would you say there's steps, like if you're low in testosterone or whatever it might be, like steps you would recommend before someone goes on HRT in terms of like, you mentioned D3 potentially?
I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. So I think that's very individual. And again, we're talking specifically men, if we're talking about testosterone, most likely. So in that case, I think the thing to consider is that for many men, if you go on testosterone replacement therapy, it is to some extent a one-way door, right?
Mhm.
In other words, you very likely will reduce or completely shut off your body's ability to produce testosterone endogenously and probably sperm. That's not completely true. There are cases where young people have been able to come back and restore endogenous production of sperm and testosterone, but the risk is certainly there. So you need to be aware of that if you go on testosterone replacement therapy, there is a good chance if you want to maintain testosterone, you will need to be on that therapy for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
So that's one thing to consider. And that's going to be an individual question. Do I want to do everything I possibly can before I take that step? You mentioned vitamin D. That's the other thing to consider is, are there potentially other things that you can fix that are leading to a hormonal imbalance? And I think absolutely everybody should look at that first under the care of their physician, right? So things like nutritional deficiencies, resistance training in some people can increase testosterone production. So things like that, yes, you should look and see, is there something other than the aging process or, something that's happening specifically in the pituitary or in your gonads that are driving the hormonal changes? Look at that first. Try to fix other potential causes before you go right to replacement therapy. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always had visualization of testosterone levels, just for example, or hormone levels being sort of like a gauge where it's red, green, and then red again. And a lot of people are in the red for
Are you talking about low,
low to
medium,
high.
high?
Yeah, like I did 2 rounds of steroids in my early 20s, and I was in the high, also having negative effects. Where a lot of people.
And how did you define those as negative effects?
Oh, like well, my blood pressure, my
Mm-hmm.
cholesterol, my lipid
Yeah.
panels.
Yeah.
What's funny is some of the effects are permanent, like if you have balding or gyno.
Right.
But the effects are the benefits. The good effects are temporary. So it's a really bad trade-off. Where I was pretty young, kind of
Yeah,
stupid
sure.
back then. Like
Yeah.
I would never do it now.
So look,
I do have 2
I
kids.
drank and smoke. You did steroids. Okay,
Yeah, same thing.
we all do dumb stuff when
Yeah.
we're kids.
Yeah. So, but I do have 2 kids now. So I thankfully, I did 2 10-week cycles, probably a year apart, and it didn't affect anything long term. But
yeah, right. And I mean, again, I think everybody's situation is different. I think the question, though, in my mind is, especially with things like sex hormones, it's not obvious where. So I would agree with you, right? Low, optimal, or normal, whatever those terms mean, right? I don't think we know how to measure optimal for lots of things. And then too high in these cases. I think it's not always obvious where that too high mark is. And I think with aging in particular, this is true for both men and women, there are some pretty substantial costs associated with sex hormone deficiencies, right? So again, we talked about lean mass, loss of bone density, loss of sexual function, depression, all of these things, energy, right? And so I think, it's pretty clear that for many people, once you get down in the suboptimally low range, there are a lot of benefits that accrue from replacement therapy. And I think for a long time, the risks were greatly overblown. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for this. There were some poorly interpreted, human studies. There's been sort of the regulatory, I don't even know where this derives from, but this, really strong regulatory component to sex hormones and villainization of these things, right? That I think the scare tactics have been employed in some cases where I actually don't know that there's a lot of evidence for negative side effects. Sure, if you push it really, really high, but in the context of replacement therapy, I'm not really convinced there's much in the way of negative side effects for most people. So I guess my view is that it's certainly something that everybody, I think, should get their hormones measured, probably starting in their 50s, at least once every few years. And I don't see a lot of downside to replacement therapy at this point if your biomarkers suggest that that's appropriate.
Yeah, and as far as I know, you're not on HRT, right?
I am not. I have never taken testosterone, although we'll do an episode on it at some point, I'm sure. I have been sort of low testosterone, low normal to low testosterone for a couple of years, and I probably will at some point. But I'm also, we talked about this recognition that it is to some extent a one-way door, and I want to try to do everything I can before I take that step of, being on testosterone therapy for the rest of my life.
Okay. And some of those things are just like the low-hanging fruit of diet, exercise. I've even heard you in a different podcast, you mentioned avoiding microplastics, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how, I mean, again, I don't, the microplastic stuff is still pretty new. The impact that certainly they can have impacts on hormone levels. How strong that is, that I think it's a good idea to avoid the microplastics regardless of where your testosterone is at. Like, I think there's all sorts of reasons why you probably want to do that.
Yeah, I just, at least with heated stuff, so like all my Tupperware is glass, my coffee cups are glass. So.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely moved away from plastic water bottles to stainless steel, and it makes sense.
All right, so we got a couple more. So this one is skin aging clock, and I tried this. I think the company's called Novos, and you take a photo of your face, and they have 2 million people, whatever, in this algorithm. And it gets 31 for me. I'm 32.
Yeah.
And it also gives you recommendations on like where you fell short.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any value to it unless it somehow motivates you to improve your lifestyle. Like, what are you going to do?
True. Yeah, good point.
Okay, this is what the algorithm says. First of all, does it mean anything? And then second, what are you going to do? I don't know.
That's a good point. It's actually
the D category or the F category. I don't know.
It's not really, I guess, that actionable.
It's more of harm. Could it harm you? Yeah, I guess it could harm you if it makes you anxious about your skin age.
Yeah, it would have told me.
It could also motivate you.
It was like, you don't have any wrinkles. That's great. It's like I scored like 8 out of 100, which is super low for porousness. Like, you have a lot of pores. I'm like, well, what do I do about that? I don't know. All right, this is actually our last one here. It's a cognitive function test. So assessments to evaluate various aspects of cognitive abilities, memory, attention.
Yeah, again, I guess I'd kind of put this. I guess I'd put it in the B category. Although again, I'm not sure what you do about it, right? So if it motivates you to modify your lifestyle, then that's a good thing. If it creates anxiety, then that's a bad thing. So I tend to believe that information is power, right? That knowing the data is better than not knowing the data. I think for a lot of people, knowing the data creates anxiety. So maybe it depends on what kind of person you are. I don't know. But does that make it a C? I don't know.
Would it be like, who'd be a good candidate? Like, I know at early medical, like, TS practice, they have someone who this is all they do, and they do all the different tests, and it's pretty difficult to establish a baseline. And you might repeat the test every few years to see, are they getting better or worse? Like, I think it's relatively hard to measure someone's trajectory towards Alzheimer's and dementia when they're 40s and 50s.
Well, I think there are emerging tests that can give you early predictions of dementia, right? So there are, retinal imaging now that, again, these aren't quite ready for prime time, but it seems pretty clear that you can get predictions for dementia from retinal testing or brain MRI. All of these things, though, sort of fall in the category of what do you do if you find out that you are on the path to dementia, and again, maybe it's motivational, which is great. If that causes you to clean up your diet and exercise more and get better sleep, that's all good. If it creates anxiety or depression, that's bad. I mean, you could probably put genetic testing in this same category. So I kind of think wherever we stick this one, we kind of need to stick the genetic testing as well, right? Because it's the same thing. It's like, what do you do about it? Although in the case of the genetic testing, there are some genetic disorders where it's very clear what you do about it. There are some where it's not so clear what you do about it. So I don't know. I guess I don't know, A-, B+, somewhere in there for both of those. Yeah.
So kind of knowing if you have this, if you have a higher risk for Alzheimer's, it might make you want to keep your A1C low or to have a good metabolic health, because those things could be a multiplier.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there are lots of things you can do to lower your risk of dementia, right? But it's also the same things you would do to lower your risk for all sorts of other stuff. it's also the things you would do to slow your rate of biological aging, right?
Yeah.
So, eat a healthy diet, exercise regularly, get better sleep, focus on your human relationships, maybe get a dog. I don't know.
Yeah.
All of these things that are going to have a positive impact on your overall health status. So I don't know that there's anything right now, though, that we could recommend to people if they find out that they are performing poorly on a cognitive test that is specific to cognitive function beyond these sort of things that are going to overall affect health. I know there are some of these supplements that people think are beneficial for cognitive function. Again, maybe not at this point. Maybe it pushes the risk reward ratio for certain individuals closer to reward for some of these supplements where it's less clear, but where they might have a specific benefit for brain function.
Okay. Yeah. I have one ApoE gene, and I know I have a very long-lived family.
You mean the E4 epsilon 4 variant?
Yeah. And I have a lot of people in my family who are very long-lived, 90 plus, and towards the end, a few of them have gotten dementia, Alzheimer's. So it's relatively motivating. And someone I know who's pretty well known on YouTube, he's got 2 variants of the E4. Is that what it is, right?
Yeah.
And he is the healthiest person I know.
Yeah.
So
again, I think for some people, he's very, very, very motivating. I think, there is certainly this school of thought that for E4 variants, they might be better candidates for something like rapamycin. Certain doctors prescribe it for that reason. So yes, I think there are, and this is what I was talking about, where it might shift the risk reward a little bit so that the reward's a little bit greater, right? In those individuals for some of these interventions where it's less clear that there's definitely a benefit, but some reason to think there might be a benefit for people who are more likely to develop dementia.
All right. Well, I think that's good. That's everything.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how good I feel about these
these
rankings, but I guess we'll live with it for now. Maybe change it around. I think I overthought the definitions a bit, but I think this is pretty good in terms of my general enthusiasm for a lot of these things. Would I change
anything you want to change
right away? I don't know.
A couple Fs, a lot of As. That's really good.
I think this looks pretty good.
Yeah, I wanted to mention if the audience or if people like this episode, we could go into we can do a full one just on supplements, a full one just on blood work. I mean, maybe a full one on just sort of these epigenetic age tests and kind of have all tests into one sort of bucket. So our body composition measurements. So
yeah.
So let us know.
Maybe we should come back in 3 months and see cold and see if the rankings change.
Yeah, that'd be fun too. All right, Matt. Well, thanks for your time. That was good.
Yep, this is fun. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching this episode on the Optispan YouTube channel. I hope you liked it. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you're not a subscriber yet, be sure to subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.